Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast. Sitting down with Oisin McElvaney again, talking about Irish history. Who's that fellow behind you on the picture? That's a very iconic picture right there. Very iconic photograph, right? The was that on the way to sign the treaty?
Yeah, I think so. And then, that would have been taken near Henrietta Street in Dublin.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. I love the drop leg holster with the Webley.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah, pretty badass. And back in the day when generals actually fought, the all right, so we've had a lot of great feedback on the Irish History podcast that we've been doing, and I've been out of the loop for a little bit working, and you came over here, but I missed you because I was in Utah. But what are we going to talk about today?
well, today we're going to talk about the Brighton bomb and
Yeah.
the hunt for Patrick Magee, the Brighton bomber.
Okay. So previously we talked about like kind of 100-year-old history, the revolution or the War of Independence, all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to bring it into the somewhat modern era. We're talking about mid 80s, right?
That's right.
Yep. Yep. Mid 80s. So do you want to frame it for us and kind of let people know who are not familiar with this incident, this piece of this is the closest the IRA ever got to killing Margaret Thatcher, and she was hated and hunted, and they really, really wanted to get her, and they came extremely, extremely close. But go ahead and frame that for us, will you, please?
But I suppose the incident in question happened in 1984. And if you can picture it, a man 32 years of age, clean shaven, well dressed, and missing the tip of his ring finger on his right hand, checked into the Brighton Hotel. Now, by all accounts, this man was pleasant. He was unremarkable. He greeted the reception with a very warm British accent. And again, by eyewitness accounts, he ranged from 5'7" to 6'2". Hair color was noted as brown, black, and grey. And he signed in under the name of Roy Walsh. Now, this man's name was not Roy Walsh. He went by many aliases, some of them under the names of Old Fenians and Irish Republicans that had done this 100 years ago, like Tom Clark. Others were nom de guerres that were given to him by, his enemies, known as the Chancer. But the intelligence files of the Special Branch RUC, MI5, MI6, and E Squadron SES knew him as Patrick Joseph Magee, who would be later known as the Brighton Bomber. This man checked into room 629, and what happened in that room was going to irreversibly change British policy between Ireland and England. For ages up until that point, the British always remembered the 5th of November, the gunpowder plot. Remember the 5th of November. But now they had a new date to remember. The sole plan in Patrick Magee's mind at this point was to bomb the Brighton Hotel, to kill the British cabinet, and importantly, kill Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, it was not immediate. It was like in the states, kind of framing it in American. It was like the Democratic or Republican convention, basically, right? Where the Tory party, which are a conservative party, were having their annual convention in Brighton and in that hotel. So the whole freaking government was there. It's very easy to look back, hindsight being 2020, and I did courses in the military in Ireland, especially on searching stuff and prepping for visits and all that, because the fact that and they probably did search the rooms, they just didn't search it well enough, right? But the fact that somebody could go in a couple of weeks earlier, plant a bomb, and leave it there and time it to go off, pretty impressive operation, right? When you look at it purely as a military kind of eye. Very well planned, very well executed, and almost. I mean, they did kill, I think, 5 or 6 people, right? I mean, and very, very close to killing Thatcher.
Sure. Yeah, and I think also like the secondary aim that they had was to, during this period of time, Margaret Thatcher was trying to implement what the Americans tried to implement in the Vietnam War with Vietnamization, with Ulsterization, and also part of that was criminalization. So basically, it meant that instead of having British Army troops from units within England, they would try and get the UDR, the Ulster, the local militia there to do most of the fighting and keep it contained. But this bomb kind of showed this is definitely not contained. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
big part.
Still fairly early in the conflict, even though it had been going on for a decade or more. But yeah, the UDR is the Ulster Defence Regiment. It's a British Army regiment, but it's people from Northern Ireland, but it's Protestants, right, from Northern Ireland. A lot of collusion going on with the UDR and the UDA, which is a terrorist organisation, it's a whole other subject. But when you look at it in context of the time, 1984, 1981 was the hunger strikes. And Thatcher came in 79, I believe, and known as the Iron Lady, didn't bend on the Falklands War, didn't bend on the hunger strikes, the coal miners. Like, she was not flexible. That's one thing you could say about her, and she basically let the hunger strikers die. 10, I think, hunger strikers die, and she just let them all die. And for that, I think that was the really, really driving force to kill her. I remember in Dundalk, right south of the border where I grew up, there used to be street signs up, or posters everywhere. And I showed a picture of Thatcher, and it said, "Wanted for murder and torture of political prisoners." So she was like the number one target for the IRA.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And it's funny in this sort of story, like, you kind of realize that I suppose that the whole story of the Brighton bomb is that with individuals who die in a war or people who are assassinated and so on, nothing happens within a vacuum. It affects other people. It has this almost butterfly effect. It has knock-on effects with other people, and you see it throughout the story. People who were close to Pat Magee that were killed that made him go into the IRA.
Mm-hmm.
People who were close to Thatcher who were killed that made her have a hardline approach or more hardline approach.
Yeah.
Even the people who were chasing Pat Magee. It was actually a really interesting guy who wrote a great book, Peter Gurney. He was an EOD specialist. But like his colleagues who got killed by IEDs that made him go that route as well after Magee. Mm-hmm. So they're all kind of intertwined,
I think in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, the IRA had they hadn't evolved into what they became in the end, right? But this is the start of it, it seems. Putting a bomb, like 30 pounds of high explosive, into a hotel and leaving a long delayed timer on it was kind of unique. That was kind of a whole new world to deal with. Usually a lot of homemade explosives, ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, it's only about a third or a quarter as effective as high explosives. But obviously you're not rolling barrels of fuel into a hotel, right? You need high explosives. And to have that much high explosive, be able to get into England with it, be able to go into the hotel where the conference is going to be and set it off at the right, that was an impressive operation. And I think it really made the British sit up and look and go, holy crap. What the hell's going on here?
I think the big thing for them is absolutely, like, there's a great book that's out that I read quite thoroughly prior to this called Killing Thatcher. And it documents basically the kind of evolution of bomb making as well. I mean, like, obviously the advent of commercial explosives was really important to them.
Yeah.
But also for long time delay mechanisms. Like, they went from the ANFO explosives with maybe some training from, the improvised munitions handbook kind of stuff, basic kind of stuff, and then took that and started implementing lots of micro switches, tilt switches. They became very advanced.
Yeah. Did we know how Magee lost one of his fingers? Was that a bombing thing? Did he get a little careless with the ingredients? Huh?
I don't know. It's funny. Like, I mean, he lost it at some point. He's a very elusive character, so you lose points in time where there's like a good 5-year period where he could have lost it through a number of things, but it's just the tip of his finger. Could be a workplace incident, so to speak.
Yeah. You said he checked in with a British accent. Did he live in England?
Yeah. So I mean, if you look at Pat Magee, it's very kind of interesting background. So like, he's born in 1951 in the Markets district in Belfast. Now, the pre-existing generation, his parents, now they were burnt out of their homes in the 1920s, and like due to the ongoing kind of discrimination that he was experiencing there prior to the Troubles kicking off in earnest, the family decided to go to England to live in England, and the mother ensured they spoke the British accent. So they had British mannerisms, British accents. They understood sort of the local kind of customs that are slightly different between the Irish and the British. But at the end of the day, as you know and I know, as being a foreigner in another country, you don't forget where you're from. And these people in particular, when you're forced out of a place, you don't forget the discrimination. There's that element where if you're growing up as a foreigner, and you see this probably with the most modern iteration with people from maybe the Middle East who've gone to America or to England, they realize I may not be fish nor fowl. I don't quite fit in. I don't know where I kind of, where I sit in this society, and like a lot of guys his age who are kind of, let's say a little bit on the wilder side. He got involved in petty crime and all that kind of stuff as a young kid. Stole a motorbike. Importantly, got fingerprinted for it, which will probably play a role later on. And the parents said, maybe it's better off that he's back in Ireland, away from this, back home. Of course, he went back home when the Troubles kicked off.
Yeah.
So probably the worst place to have a young fella who is trying to find a bit of identity for himself too.
Yeah. Let's talk about the bombing itself and what happened, when the bomb went off.
Yeah, so the bomb itself, I mean, like, as you said yourself, I mean, like, it was, the bomb itself was about 150 pounds of commercial explosive. I think it was jet ignite. They had gone into the room, they had done several dummy runs with other conferences. They were surveilling them for about a year beforehand, figuring out what the security mechanisms were, what means they used to detect bombs, etc. And they realized that, they're going to have a very large explosive. And they thought there must be another way around this. And the explosive itself wasn't as important as the thought behind it. So they got an IRA volunteer who was a structural engineer to go into the room and examine the Brighton Hotel. And they realized that they could turn the hotel itself into the weapon. So their plan was to put this gel ignite bomb under a bathtub in room 629, detonated with a long-term delay timer. So it's about 3 weeks in advance, set to a particular time. Like, I mean, they were only off by 6 minutes.
Do we know what kind of timer that was?
So they kind of cannibalized a videotape recorder.
See, I heard that years ago. At the time, probably, or very, very in the 80s, or that, and I did all courses on this stuff, but that they use a VCR timer as a long. But I've been looking recently, after you told me this was going to be, and I couldn't find anywhere that actually said it was a VCR timer. That's interesting, yeah, because I had heard that a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, like, the interesting thing about it was that no one really knows what actually happened in the room. They don't believe Magee was alone, but who is involved with him is a very, very closely guarded secret. Basically the room itself was chosen by a structural engineer. The idea was to dislodge this grand fireplace. And so it collapsed down on top of the rest of the floors, and it would just be like just an absolute killing zone. And it would be landing on top of the presidential suite, which was where Thatcher was going to be. Now, it was set for 3 a.m., October 12th, the day of their conference. It went off 2:54 and 1 millisecond went off. Basically, Thatcher had left her bathroom at that moment, and her room was absolutely destroyed. She'd have been cut to ribbons,
Yeah.
So they were very close to killing her. Now, as they said themselves, today we're unlucky, but remember, we only have to be lucky once. You'll have to be lucky always. And that's a scary message.
Yeah,
it's very true.
Yeah, the thing detonating the bomb where it did in that old probably 100-year-old hotel, that thing, with the big ass chimney up the middle, and it collapsed down. I thought that was just a fluke. I didn't know that was purposely done that way.
interesting about it. I didn't think they put so much forethought into it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they it's never been released, but I'm assuming they had people on the inside leaking them information about where conferences were going to be, where meetings were going to be, and they were going to plan around it.
Yeah, this is before the internet,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. These were
Yeah.
those-
Yeah, yeah. You know, in pubs near,
yeah.
you go into pubs near where the parliament is and stuff like that, and just sit there and listen. And I'm sure you hear a lot. Um, the So how many people died?
About 5 people died. Now it's kind of interesting though. So I mean, Thatcher herself, she seemed on the surface very unflappable. Like she would continue on with the conference, but her closest aides wrote about this afterwards. She was very deeply affected. She confided in them that she believed that inevitably the IRA were going to assassinate her.
Mm.
And basically, no one had a clue who set the bomb off, despite Pat Magee at this point being a very well known IRA operator in the sense that like he was in the operator elite element of it, but pretty low down on the overall kind of military ranking.
Mm-hmm.
He was well known, and I mean like they still like I mean they still didn't know who set off the bomb. They had a list of suspects. And in the meantime, this guy had reset up shop and set up a base of operations in London 3 months after the bomb. I mean, the guy was still on the loose. So there was genuine fear there that there's going to be another attempt.
Thatcher Thatcher was a teenage girl in London in the Blitz in World War II. Yeah, she'd so it's not like she hadn't been blown up before, But that was very deliberate to get out in front of the media right away and go, "You're not going to stop us. We're going to drive on." Blah blah blah. Right? The investigation. All right. So let's talk about, because they inevitably caught the active service unit that did this with an extensive investigation. Let's talk through that piece.
It's interesting. Like I mean, there's two sides of this. I mean, like I went to a talk once with Pat Magee speaking at it.
Really?
This is about maybe 5 years ago in Trinity College.
Didn't he like link up with one of the victims' kids, and they went doing this motivational I could never do that, man. I hold a grudge way too hard to do something like that.
Yeah.
Is that what you went to? Like both of them?
I saw them speak at it. At the time, I was doing a series of talks myself on enhanced interrogation techniques, and it was about like the hooded men, sensory deprivation, all those 5 techniques.
Yeah.
And just happened to realize there was another talk going on. I decided I'd stay and listen to it. There he was. But he had mentioned that they said on the place card so the name Roy Walsh is interesting. Roy Walsh wasn't just an imagined name. It actually belonged to an IRA bomber who's already in prison. Probably not a good idea to do that. But anyway, for some reason, he wrote that name down. They said they found a fingerprint that matched his on the sign-in card, and they matched it to the time he stole a motorcycle back when he was a 6-year-old boy in England. But Pat Magee swears that there's no way that he left a fingerprint on that. He'd been trained very extensively by a guy called Gerard Chute in another IRA operative from Cavan, a really operationally very, very efficient person, and how to do tradecraft, how to, finger.
Yeah. You know how it is. They could have had an informant inside and they didn't want to give it away, so they just said, this is what we got. Yeah, it happens all the time.
I think what probably happened was just common sense. Like, I mean, they realized, there are so many high-profile bombers that could have pulled this off. We know where they are because they're under surveillance by the Irish government or the British government. Who's left, really?
Yeah.
And I say Pat Magee was very high on that list.
Yeah, they pretty surveilled everybody. That because when something like that happens, no holds barred, right? They pump money into the investigation, as many people as they need, and you surveil everybody. Yeah, interesting.
They're also noticing that like 3 months after the bombing, they figured it was probably going to be Pat Magee. They thought Roy Walsh was probably Pat Magee. They couldn't find him in Ireland. He slipped past the guards special detectives unit. He had gotten back into England with a new assumed identity. And within 3 months of the Brighton bombing, he had set up shop in London, and he had set up a new ASU there. And we're starting to see a series of financial bombings with long delay timers holding the city of London to a standstill. So people are starting thinking this is probably our guy, you know?
Yeah. I assume he didn't fly or take a regular boat ferry into London, into England, because I took that ferry into England, and the counter-terrorist police freaking grilled me. And I remember, excuse me, I was in the Irish Army at the time, in fucking special operations, and I had an ID card, and the guy talking to me said, "Your brother's in the army too, isn't he?" And he knew, right? And because they'd obviously did some digging on me before I got there, you know. But of course, I was super calm because I had nothing to hide. But he actually asked me, "What kind of stuff does that unit do?" And I said, "That's classified." And he's like, "Oh, okay." But they used to take like fishing boats and stuff like that, because it's a short hop, skip, and a jump across the Irish Sea, especially into Scotland and places like that. It's real short. I think you can see Scotland from Northern Ireland on a clear day. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that. Like, I mean, my father brought my mother on the most exotic honeymoon known to man, which is driving from Monaghan to Donegal.
Yeah.
Got stopped by British Army, and they already knew like where he was from, like who he was to school with, etc., etc. It's like, you know, this person, this person, this person.
Yeah. There was a friend of mine when I was stationed in Dundalk, and he lived in Belfast. And he left to go home on the weekend, right? And he crossed the border into Northern Ireland. He was in Belfast, and he was going to sell his car. And a British Army patrol came by, and they were looking at the car, and they were like, "What are you doing, guys?" And they were like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about selling this car." And the Brits said, "It's a pretty good car. It just crossed the border an hour ago." All right, the investors. So they pulled the print, theoretically. And how did they actually find him if they couldn't find him?
So basically, there's an awful lot of different moving parts here. So, as you know yourself, a lot of these intelligence agencies don't talk with one another. They want to keep certain assets secret to themselves.
Yeah, job security at the expense of real security.
Yeah,
it's stupid, and it does happen. Yeah. Do you know the difference between MI5 and MI6, real quick?
Yeah, so MI5 are by definition the domestic intelligence agency, and MI6 is the international or foreign agency. There's a difference between comparing them to the CIA and FBI, because by definition the FBI are a law enforcement agency as well. MI5 are not. They are security and surveillance. That's
okay.
it. There's
about
law enforcement.
Okay, I always wondered that.
Yeah, and there's always during the 70s there was a massive tug of war between MI5 and MI6 with regards who gets to run operations in the north, because you know, it is kind of in between, really.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
and the tactics they used were more, let's just say, foreign-based tactics than some you'd see in England.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I mean, like, there is again, like, this gets really kind of very dark, but there's another unit, E4A section of the RUC, which is like their covert intelligence gathering group. They basically wanted an RUC, or it's hard to call them a police force, but like a quasi-military, paramilitary, I don't like using that term, but paramilitary police force that they were. They wanted their equivalent of the SES and Special Reconnaissance Regiment elements there. So a guy called Ian Phoenix was in charge of that. And Ian Phoenix would later become fairly infamous, because when the British were withdrawing from the north, he was not happy. And him and all the other intelligence and security hawks were put on a Chinook helicopter over England and just blew up over the sea, basically.
Really?
Yeah. Which people say was just an accident, but I think it's really that you have all your top security guys in one helicopter, and it just
So they were part of the RUC.
What's that?
They were part of the RUC.
Part of the RUC, you had SES, you had MI6,
Yeah.
MI5, 30 Hawks in the one helicopter, and
Wow.
it crashed into the Mullaghtyre area of Scotland. But
Mm.
like it's all very, very dodgy. Some people would suggest there was a bit of house cleaning at the end of that to get rid of the Hawks and let things just roll on.
Wow. What year?
That when that crash, I think that was like 1998 or no, sorry,
Really?
1993.
Mm.
So
That's a whole nother podcast.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I mean, like there was house cleaning on both sides, I think, but that was
Mm.
pretty, pretty dodgy kind of period of history. But anyway, Ian Phoenix was uh, sort of surveilling certain elements within the north, particularly a guy called McSharry. McSharry was like the sort of ideal that the Provisional IRA wanted. The guy was very active from a military point of view. He was constantly getting into gunfights with the SES. So he survived several ambushes with the SES and other sort of covert military units out there, to the point where they started calling him the Armalite Kid, which, never good when you started getting a nickname like that.
No, no. It goes against the low profile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the big part of this whole thing. So, like, he was not low profile, but he was very, very capable from like an operational point of view. So he also, just to make things even more high profile, he started standing for election for Sinn Féin as well. So I
Mm.
mean, there's a target on this guy's back. Now, basically, he was going to be the go-between the IRA in the north and the IRA of what was a very shadowy unit within the IRA called the England Department, which I can tell you about that is like the upper echelons of operations in the IRA at that time.
Mm.
These guys. You didn't tell anyone you're going into the England Department. You would make up an excuse like, "I'm sorry, it's not for me. I'm not cut out for it. I'm resigning, or I'm not re-upping. I'm
Yeah.
leaving." And most people would say, "Oh, this guy's a coward. He's fecking off." But in
Mm-hmm.
reality, he would be going over to the England department to carry out operations in London. You know, so it's
Yep.
very much a need to know kind of
Mm-hmm.
client. But so basically, Peter McSharry, high profile guy, went over to England, was tailed there by the RUC, and for once they contacted their colleagues in MI5 and the Metropolitan Police anti-terrorist units, and very, very quickly there was sort of a pursuit to the active service unit led by Pat Magee. Now, the reason why he went over there is uh, a bit complicated. Usually, they wouldn't. It's up to speculation, but usually they wouldn't make such a hasty kind of move over from the north to England. They would send someone else. They'd
Mm.
send someone which they call like a clean skin over there. A person had no priors, totally
Yeah.
normal.
Not under surveillance.
Exactly. I think the reason was revolving around a particular person, a guy called Donald Craig. Now, Donald Craig is kind of an outlier, and be very honest, yeah, I would say it's probably it's a very weird thing to say, because in the last couple of sentences we've been talking about Pat Magee, sort of fairly cold, calculating bomber, but probably the reason why he got caught was he had a soft spot for like young recruits, because he understood like the stress that was under them. So
Mm.
they had when he had reset up his small ASU, his splinter cell in London, he got some very high profile people there. He had your man Peter McSharry, but he also had a gentleman called Jerry MacDonald, who was a recent escapee from the Maze prison, which was like, one of the highest profile prison escapes in
Yeah.
European history.
Mm.
And he had a number of other people, but he also had a couple of these, clean skins who were to procure things from, like apartments, things just as simple as batteries, like fertilizer with ammonium nitrate, cars, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, a person that was recommended to him wasn't a spy, wasn't an informant, but was just not cut out for this, you know.
Mm.
This guy called Donald Craig. He was from Scotland, but he had Irish sympathies. He also happened to have like severe mental health issues. He was like, I think he was a paranoid schizophrenic, not a good thing, right? Secondly, he started buying stuff that just made no sense. He got a getaway car with two doors, only like lots of stupid mistakes. And at a certain point, Donald Craig just wanted out. Because of his irrational kind of mental state, other people in that group said, we're just going to have to knock this guy off because he's very liable. Like, if he was
a weak link,
rational, we would let him off. But he's very irrational. He's going to go to the police. He's going to say something. We should probably just end this now.
Yeah, he's the weak link in the group, right? So let me just recap this. So, McKee is they can't find him, right? He's the main man, but they're tagging these auxiliary people coming to meet him. To kind of bring the unit together to get a bombing campaign going on the mainland in England. And by tracking the auxiliary, they lead him back to Magee. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think the real problem was that this is just it's terrible luck for them in some ways. But this gentleman, Donald Craig, I mean, like, he wrote down a letter saying he was resigning. Pat Magee was advocating to McSherry, look, we're not going to kill him. He's just a kid. He'll take off. Don't worry about it. But like, apparently your man, Donald Craig, had written down on the back of this letter all the locations of the bombs they'd already set for the long-term time. Yeah, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
So McSherry had seized this letter and was going back to talk to Magee about this. And he was showing him this as almost as evidence, like, look, we probably should sort this out. Unfortunately, he was tailed in the pursuit of this, and they were able to capture them.
Okay. So they had the locations of all the bombs that had already been set.
Yeah.
The British did. Okay. And they had the active service unit?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
They seized the bomb-making material?
Some of it. I mean, like, these units operated independent of each other. They had, like, very much like the Fenian Brotherhood before them, they had centers. So they had probably an intelligence officer that was linking between them.
Yep.
But, only one person in that group would probably know, probably someone like Pat Magee, a very trustworthy person who really endured enhanced interrogation and torture and wasn't going to break. Like,
yeah. The cell structure has been used all over the world for that reason, right? So they rolled the active service unit up. Donald Craig, was that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, he starts chattering, I assume.
Yes,
he starts running his mouth and telling them everything. They had to give him, they had to waterboard him to shut him up.
Yeah.
Stop talking. So basically they all get rolled up, bomb making material, and then they go and defuse the bombs that are already in place. Is that correct?
That's right. So again, they get in this gentleman, Peter Gurney, a gentleman who's been chasing Pat Magee for the longest time, who's lost already one of his friends to one of his bombs, Ken Haworth, in London to one of his bombs. And he's eventually able to disarm all the commercial bombs he's set that haven't gone off already.
Yeah. I think they had some anti-handling devices on them, mercury tilt switches and anti-lifts. Yeah. In the movies, they disarm a bomb and they open it up and they have night vision goggles on. There's lasers and all. It's not that complicated. It's actually pretty simple. An anti-handling switch is mercury tilt switch is super easy to make. Mercury being a good conductant of electricity, right? Positive, negative. Thing gets tilted, boom, right? Anti-lift switch, super easy. Photosensitive switch, all that stuff. I've been training all that stuff. It's actually quite easy. Now, and that's why they defuse it rather than just blowing it up, which is the safer option, because they want that evidence, right? They want fingerprints and DNA now is what they want off those bombing. Like in Afghanistan, IEDs on the road, you just put a charge beside it and blow it up, right? But in a kind of criminal prosecution like that, you need that evidence. So if you know what you're doing, you can defuse a bomb, right? Red wire, blue wire, right? If you cut the wrong wire, the timer starts counting down really quickly to give you time. You know what I mean? Fucking movies, man. Worst bomb ever. You know, it goes off and it counts down the clock really quickly. Anyway, so they go to court. I assume they throw the book at this whole group.
Yeah.
What happened to the guy Craig? Did he get leniency?
He got off.
He did. When did he hire Ira and kill him?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, I actually think, who knows? But I actually think your man Magee may have just said, like, leave be. Like, I mean, he's just not well mentally.
Yeah. That's the guy you want to recruit, right?
Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing. I think it's like they just wanted someone that wasn't Irish. You know, someone that just didn't attract attention. Of course, you know, mental health always useful to look into.
Yep. Clean skin. It's not all. You know, competence goes along with that, right? That's so basically, bad luck on their part and good police work on the British government's part, right? Good surveillance, probably countless hours of following these guys and tracking these guys, which is boring as hell. I've done it. Some of these guys are actually, no, I won't say that. I'm not say that. But you know, it's good police work, right? It's good police work. It's in the days before kind of digital tracking and technical surveillance with tags and trackers and all that stuff wasn't a thing in the 80s. It was people on the ground. And, you know, you follow one car, you need like 8 cars to follow one car. Because you got to keep switching out, because if they're paying attention at all, they'll catch you, right? So exhausting, but they stayed with it, and it eventually paid off for them. I assume all these guys were let go with the Good Friday Agreement, like everybody else.
They were. Like, I mean, Magee's an interesting guy. Like, I mean, he did a PhD when he was in prison. Betrayal of Irish Republicans in media. Bizarre, but you know, did that, got released. And I suppose, I mean, like this is a man who was active, and I mean, like, I suppose you're right, it was good police work, but you have to realize this man was active for 10 years with high profile attacks. I mean, like, his next target before he was actually rolled up was the Hereford base for the SES.
Yeah, I saw that. Yep. Yeah. You better not fuck that one up.
I mean, this is the thing, though. Like, that's a truth. I mean, like, E Squadron SES had his face, photo, everything. You know, they knew he was a genuine threat. You know.
Yeah. People just don't pay attention. That was 1984, right? The Brighton bomb. 85 was the Anglo-Irish Agreement.
That's
when
right.
the Irish government and the English government got together. I think Fitzgerald was the Taoiseach, I think, and then they sat down and they wrote all these cross-border operations and all that. Now, some of it happened and some of it didn't. Censoring the IRA and the media and all that stuff came out probably as a direct result of that Brighton bomb, right? It's one of the most pivotal occurrences in the whole history of Northern Ireland. And then years later, like I think 90 or 91, Thatcher came to Dublin when I was in Special Ops and on a European community, freaking European Union meeting. So they would have loved to have gotten her. Did they try again?
Well, it's very interesting you say that. So, look, even though Magee was imprisoned, Thatcher like got a third term, right? Like the Brighton bomb kind of like rejuvenated her. Like, you know, surviving an assassination attempt will always make you look like, you know, there's a person who can stand up to pressure. So she got elected back in again. But the third term went terrible for her. She got defeated after her third term. And the IRA actually had planned this really fairly significant attack on her. But unfortunately, she got defeated. They didn't think she was going to lose. So they said, we might as well go for another prime minister who's in her place. So then you got the 1991 Downing Street mortar attack.
Yeah, that was an impressive attack too.
was, and the gas thing about it is the person who was in charge of diffusing the rest of the mortars that were there was the same guy that captured Pat Magee, Peter Gurney.
Yeah.
And like, to quote himself, he said, "I'm very impressed. If the angle was it was maybe 5 or 10 degrees more, the bombs would have directly impacted number 10."
Yeah.
I mean, and that's like within.
They were having a war conference in number 10 about the Gulf War.
Yeah.
When the mortars come in and landed in the yard, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, damn, close again. Those homemade mortars. I've seen a van that was captured one time where the homemade mortars they're big gas bottles or whatever you call them, and they had them all lined up in rows, and they had the roof cut out of the van and covered with a tarp so helicopters couldn't tell. And you set a timer, boom, it launches in a sequence, and then the whole van blows up. I saw one in a base in Ireland that was captured one time. Pretty freaking impressive and very innovative. But I'm surprised they didn't, even 10, 15 years later, because of the hunger strikes, they didn't try to kill her, but they other targets and other things happened, I guess. Do you remember how long Magee did in prison?
Oh, I think it would have been about maybe 13 years.
Yeah. What was the conference you saw with him? And just to back up a little bit, excuse me, I saw this thing where him and the son of one of the people he killed got together and became friends and did all these tours and talk about conflict resolution and all this. Talk about that real quick.
Yeah, so I mean, so Sir Anthony Berry, who was very high up in British cabinet at the time, and who was a target, for Pat Magee, was killed in the Brighton bomb. Mm. His daughter, Jo Berry, gave Pat Magee a phone call and said, "Do you want to talk?" And Pat Magee very openly said, he didn't know if he could, because he was just open about it. He said, "Look," and he said it to her. He said, "Look, during a war, you don't view people as people; you view them as targets, and you are what you do. As in, like, the British soldier is just the British soldier. He's not John down the road who has 5 kids, or the British war minister is the war minister. He's not a grandfather or an uncle or whatever, And
humanize. Don't humanize them.
Yeah, exactly. You have to humanize them. Yeah,
yeah.
And I suppose, like as I said, like no death happens within a vacuum. I mean, like killing Anthony Berry, that affected Jo Berry, his daughter, it affected his family. Even if you look at Margaret Thatcher, like her mentor,
Iri Neve.
Iri Neve,
yeah.
Again, no one actually, like, during the period of time where we can't really track Pat Magee. I know it was claimed by the INLA, but can't really track Pat Magee for this period of time. He was working for the England Department at that time. And there's a very sophisticated car bomb in Westminster that blows up. Iri Neve. Well, I'm just going to leave that there. But I mean, like, again, that's something that promotes Thatcher to have a very hardline basis on hunger strikers and the war in the North as well. Far enough, you look at Pat Magee, that guy at the start did not want to join the IRA. He doesn't have a particular incident, but he talked about a friend of his coming back from a disco and the Royal Marine Commandos shooting him. He was there watching, the gouge marks in the wall where he'd been shot, big pool of blood there. Royal Marine Commandos come up and they spit on the site where he was shot, and he just says, "I'll get my own back on you." And that's one of those instances that just you annoy or you wrong the wrong person.
Oh yeah, it's happened in every conflict ever, right? There's heavy-handed tactics produce more resistance, right? Can you, because I don't know and I don't really track it, can you talk about Northern Ireland right now and what's going on with the Brexit thing and security situation? Is there any violence? Is it all kind of gone now? And now 2024, July?
It's yeah. So, like, I mean, July is the main thing there. So, like, we had the 12th of July Orange Parade. And, like, it's very hard to explain to an American audience. In fact, I had a person I know, his wife had actually come over to visit Ireland. He's a third group guy. His wife had come over, and she was asking my recommendation where to go, and she was planning to go to Belfast for the 12th of July. I was like, no.
Yep. Yeah, the Protestants March celebrating William of Orange, and it's they used to. I don't know if they do it now, but they used to purposely march through Catholic areas, which are riots and yeah. I don't know if they do that now, but
They're trying to,
yeah,
I think you're seeing now for the first time in the last 5 years, the Irish Catholic population, I'll just say the Irish population because that's probably a more generalized term. The Irish population in the north exceeds the British population in the north. And this year, the Irish population in the workforce now exceeds the British population in the workforce. So they're starting to see that power kind of slip away from themselves. And you can see tension bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. It's not helped by the fact that Sinn Féin have now become the First Minister, which is effectively the person kind of not running the show, but the face of the North at the moment. The most popular party in the North.
Which is crazy, huh? Which is crazy when you look at, Sinn Féin, if you don't know, is the political wing of the IRA, basically, right? But if they have the majority in the North, that is crazy. Do you think it'll ever go back to the South? Just personal opinion?
The North?
Yeah.
I think it's going to have to. I don't know how it can happen. I think I would really hope that there isn't a return to any sort of violence like we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost inevitable that the Republic will probably sort of assimilate the North at some point. It just seems like it's going to happen. The timeline, I'm not sure. It'll happen within my timeline, I believe. The question is what kind of a reaction you'll get from now a British minority in the North.
Yeah, you would think that you've had a generation now that have grown up out of the Troubles, basically, right? There's been some stuff, but you think you wait long enough, you have a whole generation that don't think like that anymore. But they're getting influence from their parents and you know what I mean, from their community and both sides, Catholics and Protestants, and people think, especially in the States, they think the whole Northern Ireland thing is Catholic and Protestant. And it's really not. It's a byproduct of it. It's so much more complex, like most of these kind of conflicts are, than that.
It's like if you look at any place where the British were, they have a colonial kind of template that you can work from. Like if you look at the Mau Mau in Kenya and everything else, you get an ethnic group that's loyal to you, you put them in charge to subjugate the other indigenous groups there. And that's how it usually works. Yep. But I just think that politically, I think overall in Europe, and maybe it's not just isolated in Europe, throughout the West, political leadership is very, very weak. When you have weak leadership, it leads rise to a lot of extremist views on either side.
Yep.
When you don't have common sense policies, common sense negotiations, you have rise of some fairly extreme elements within society. And that's a fear I have going forward with the North. But my personal belief is that there probably will be a United Ireland within my lifetime, certainly.
Yeah, well, it would be horrible to see it revert back to the way it was, because I grew up in it, and so did you, and it was daily, and it became normal part of life. It was just, and it becomes white noise in the background that you don't even pay attention to after a while. Oisin, thank you so much. I appreciate that. We'll put some photographs up here just to kind of lay it out for people a little more. Interesting point in the history of Northern Ireland, the history of Ireland. And I remember it actually happening. It happened in 1984. I was in high school. I remember it actually. And I remember, like I said earlier, I remember them saying it was a VCR timer. I did courses in the Irish Army later on that dealt directly with, they called them, when I was in the infantry in Dundalk, they sent us to these courses in Dublin to the engineers, and they called them specialist search teams. And we were basically the guys who went in and searched for bombs and buried wire detectors, metal detectors, disassembling freaking walls and vehicles, and learning how to build IEDs and mercury tilt switches and anti-lift switches and how everything, so you could recognize it. learning how, all about ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, all that thing, so you could recognize smells and you knew what you were looking for, basically. But I remember them briefing us on a thing, what happens now, and this is freaking in the late 80s probably, but after the Brighton bomb, where they'd go to that hotel now, and they'd basically take every freaking keg of beer out of it and replace that. Somebody would go to the brewery and watch the beer being filled into the keg, and they'd seal it with their version of Secret Service or whatever, and it would go, right? They'd pull everything, they'd x-ray walls, they'd pull as much furniture out as they can, replace it, like just extreme levels. But it's all because of that. And that's what always happens. One side does this, the other side does this, the other side just reacts and reacts and reacts and reacts. But it was extreme, the measures they went to secure a facility from something like that. And it keeps evolving, pretty interesting. All right, brother. Thank you so much. Is that a rifle beside you?
That is, yeah.
Is that your apartment you're in?
Yep.
Your house? Is this one of them old Irish houses with the big high ceilings? And is that what it is? It looks like. Is that a fireplace?
That's a fireplace, but it doesn't work. So
you could probably do some furniture. You're probably at work all the time. How's doctoring in Ireland going?
That's brilliant, actually. Yeah.
Is that? Oisin. Yeah. Thanks very much, Oisin. And hey, hit us up in the comments if you want us to talk about another subject. There's a ton of them out there. And we'll dig down and kind of unravel it for you. Okay, thank you so much.